Hello, True Health Seeker, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. Clinical certified herbalist Rosalie De La Forêt is here today to teach us all about wildcrafted herbs that are in our own backyard and how we can utilize them for our health. Now, she reversed a autoimmune condition that the doctors said would be impossible to reverse. In fact, she shouldn't even be alive right now. And it's all thanks to natural medicine that she is here today, thriving, healthy, and teaching us how we can do the same. Rosalie wants to gift a copy of her book to one of our listeners. So please go to Learn True Health Facebook group. And in the Learn True Health Facebook group, there'll be a post and you can comment there. And one of the comments will be chosen at random. So one person will be chosen at random to win a copy of Rosalie's book, her Wild Remedies book, which is so exciting. So please go to Learn True Health, the Learn True Health Facebook group. You can go to learntruehealth.com/group. That'll take you straight to the Facebook group, or search Learn True Health in Facebook and join the group so you could potentially win a copy of her book. And join the Facebook group anyway, because it's a wonderful, healthy, supportive community. I believe we're about to hit 4,000 people. Everyone is so supportive and loving, and I love how the community has grown together to help each other. There's a great search function in the group, so if you're looking for, you could type the word asthma or allergies or acne, or it's a lot of A words I'm thinking of, shampoo, air purifier, water purifier. You know, we've had so many great discussions about these kind of topics, natural household cleaners and cosmetics and everything that you can think of. We've had great discussions. So there's wonderful threads with lots of information where dozens of people have come together and shared what they use and their experiences and their reviews on different products. So you can get great insight into this holistic health world from this whole community, and it's free. So come join the Learn True Health Facebook group. I'd love to see you there and potentially win a copy of Rosalie's book. Awesome. Thank you so much for being a Learn True Health listener. Thank you so much for sharing this podcast with those you love. Let's help as many people as possible to learn true health. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 429. I am so excited for today's guest. We have a wonderful woman on the show specializing in herbs, and what I love is that she's going to teach us about how to explore our own backyard, because remedies are right around the corner. Rosalie De La Forêt, it is so wonderful to have you on the show today.
I'm so happy to be here, Ashley. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, your latest book is Wild Remedies: How to Forage Healing Foods and Craft Your Own Herbal Medicine. I think all listeners just got tingles. I mean, it's so exciting, especially in this era where we're rediscovering what it means to be self-sustainable, to be able to go into our backyard and craft a remedy or craft something that is healing for the body is so wonderful. In fact, now it's nettle season, stinging nettles, and I have a cooking membership called Learn True Health Home Kitchen, and we just filmed how to forage wild nettles and how to make a delicious stinging nettle soup.
Oh, yum.
It's so good. And that's just one of the many things that people can go into their backyard or go into, a park nearby and find these delicious herbs that are, or not all of them are delicious, but these very healing herbs out there. And you also specialize in mushrooms. So we're gonna have a great conversation today, and listeners are gonna really enjoy learning from you. Before we dive into that, though, I want to learn a bit more about you. What happened in your life that had you want to teach people how to explore the world of herbalism?
Well, I have been interested in natural health for a very long time. I was kind of an odd teenager. When I got my driver's license when I was 16, I remember thinking I was just so excited because now I could drive myself to the health food store. Um, and so that was kind of like not a lot of my friends were like that, as you might imagine. And I remember doing things like getting out vitamins for dummies at the library and making flashcards so I could like learn what vitamin A is and where it's found and the deficiencies associated with it. And so I've long been interested in natural health in that way. And I just kind of dabbled here and there as, teenager, early 20s, using natural remedies and supplements for minor health conditions. And then it was when I was in my early 20s, I came down with a really mysterious illness. I had this crazy fever. I would get a fever at night only, and it'd be kind of low grade, but it was very persistent. And then actually, it would be high grade at night. And then in the morning, it would be down to like 99. So I kind of go like at night, I'd have this 103 degrees fever. And then in the morning, it'd be 99. Wouldn't have a fever at all during the day. And I'd get this fever at night. It was so bizarre. And I had these incredible aches and pains. I could barely move. I was in my bed for like a month. And, I was just in my young 20s and I just thought I had a cold or a flu because I had a fever. And that at that time, that's the only thing I thought you ever got a fever for was a cold or really a flu. And so I just thought I had a flu and I just stayed in bed and I was in a lot of pain, didn't get out of bed much. And I had this rash that would move around my body too. So I'd have this rash on my legs and then the next day it'd be on my chest. And it was very itchy and salmon colored, like it's kind of bright orange colored. Anyway, totally bizarre. And just for a long time, that whole month, I just kind of waited to get better and I didn't get better and ended up going to the hospital. And at the hospital, they kept me there for 4 days and they took all sorts of blood samples. I had actually started going to a wilderness survival school prior to this. And so they were testing me for all sorts of things because they just thought, I must have caught some kind of weird disease from wildlife or something. So they tested me for all sorts of stuff. Couldn't find anything wrong, sent me home. And then 2 weeks later, I remember I was in a grocery store and I got the phone call and they said that I had a whole team of people working on it. And they said, the person on the phone said, well, we figured out what it is. It's a very rare autoimmune disease and it's called Still's disease and you should come in. And so I went in to see my doctor and she said, well, I talked to your team of specialists and there was a, immune specialist on there, but really there's nothing we know about this disease. There's no cure for it. You can expect a steady decline in life with a life expectancy around 40. And she gave me a brochure about it and told me that there was a Yahoo discussion group that I could talk to other people who had this disease because it's very rare. But she basically said, there's nothing we can do for you. And obviously that was a state of shock. It was like this, what I had thought a healthy 20-year-old, 22-year-old. And then I was just given this terminal illness diagnosis. And for 2 days, I took it really hard and, just kind of the pits of despair, wondering, why me? And after 2 days, I just snapped out of it all of a sudden. And I was just like, no, this is not how this is going down. So I got every book I could about rheumatoid arthritis, because even though my disease was very rare, I knew it was very similar to rheumatoid arthritis. And I just got all sorts of books and I learned about things that are pretty well known now, but this is kind of early 2000s, were not really well known. Things like intestinal permeability and how important vitamin D is and overall, diet. And at the time I, was very interested in natural health and I was eating what I thought was a very healthy diet, which was all organic, lots of wheat, lots of soy. Mainly that was kind of like the basis of my diet were those two things and vegetables, but obviously lacking in so many ways. So I learned all about this stuff. I totally overhauled my diet, got rid of wheat and soy and, worked with I slowly started working with other practitioners, acupuncturists, naturopaths, herbalists, I drank a lot of really strange, gross tasting Chinese herbal medicine teas. Those are not really designed to taste well. But I would, drink them down dutifully, really studied up on vitamin D, started supplementing. Anyway, I did all of these things. And 6 months later, I had no symptoms. And it was a huge paradigm shift for me, because before this, I was already interested in natural health, but I kind of was like, thought it was for like boo-boos, like minor things. But if you had like some serious condition, like obviously you would go to the doctor. But that's what I did. And I got no help, from this whole team of specialists at a hospital. And so that was just a huge paradigm shift for me. And one thing that was really fascinating to me is I went to see all of these different practitioners, and none of them said, in the so-called alternative health realm, none of them said like, oh, you have this named disease for which there is no cure, therefore you are doomed. What they said was, after a 2-hour intake or, all of that kind of stuff, they said, who are you and how can, we better facilitate overall health? And it was through all of that, I didn't have any symptoms 6 months later. And which, was obviously so amazing to me on so many levels. And I proudly went back to my doctor because obviously she would want to know about this. I've basically single-handedly cured an autoimmune disease. And I was like young 20s, just very like, oh yeah, I'm going to go tell her all about it. And so, I went, I'd schedule an appointment and I went, and I was like, I just thought you'd want to know that I no longer have debilitating pain in my joints. I no longer have the fevers. I no longer have the rash. I have no symptoms. I'm feeling great. And she's, and she asked what I did. And I said, well, I think it really revolved around the herbs I took and overhauling my diet and really changing things. And I remember very clearly what she said. She said, there's no scientific proof that your diet would affect an autoimmune disease.
Oh, geez.
And she said, glad you're better. You were probably misdiagnosed, even though, it was like I had all of the symptoms. Like, how could I have been misdiagnosed? But that was all that she kind of had. And she kind of showed me the door, which I can understand. Like, looking back, I can see my like 22-year-old self like proudly walking in, claiming all of these things. And as a doctor, she's like looking for evidence-based medicine, and one person saying something didn't really set off her bells in any good way. But I knew it in my heart, and I knew that I was better, and it was so astounding to me. And I really started to think about how many other people out there had my same experience, whether it was Still's disease or some other chronic illness, and we're just told like, oh, that's a named disease that we don't have a pill for yet. So, good luck. And I wanted to help other people. And so, as I mentioned, I was already in wilderness school at the time, and I was studying plants through that school. I was studying them through the lens of ethnobotany. So doing a lot of field work and learning how to identify plants, learning how to harvest them sustainably, learning how to use them for food and basketry. But after that, I kind of really sat into my calling, and I knew I wanted to be a clinical herbalist. And so I went to many different herb schools. I've done over 10 years at different herb schools, and just learned everything I could about how to use plants as medicine. And so, yeah, that's how it all got started, was with that kind of one door being shut and kind of deciding to walk through another.
That is so cool. I've interviewed people and doctors on the show that have reversed their autoimmune conditions using diet and herbs and supplements, supporting the body in its ability to heal itself. And they've come up against the same resistance in the medical community. And so one of the doctors that I interviewed recently, she's gone on to create studies like where she's getting whole groups of people with MS and reversing it and then publishing her findings and proving, we just need to get enough people with Still's disease to copy what you did and then show that you can get the same results, right? It's frustrating that the medical community pushes back so much when new discoveries are created. I actually interviewed a gastroenterologist PhD who he teaches he teaches medical doctors, and he specializes in, doing surgeries of the intestines. And he discovered and found a new illness, a new diagnosis, which is small intestinal fungal overgrowth.
Hmm.
And we never experienced that, for 50 years ago. That wasn't even a thing, but it is a thing now. And he published it. He tried to publish it, and there was a huge resistance, that the medical community didn't want to accept his findings because it was new. And it's really interesting that he found how much resistance there is to anything new. Um, and so we kind of have to, we have to push back in big ways. We have to figure out how to get this information out there, and how to, like, get studies together, get a group, like I mentioned, get a group of people with Still's disease together, or get a group of people, and then do a study and continue to prove and show that that what you stumbled upon really works. I also have had many guests and also listeners and clients who have had diabetes and reversed it, type 2 diabetes, reversed it with natural medicine and diet, and then gone back to their doctors who were treating them for 10 or 20 years, continuing them on medication for many years, and the doctors don't want to know how they reversed it. And that blows my mind. Like, the doctors that that these people have told me about, that were their doctors, and I know that not all doctors are like this, but so many of them who treat people for an illness, continuing to give them drugs year after year, when there are ways to no longer have that illness, and these doctors aren't interested in learning how to heal the body naturally. That blows my mind too. So that's why I do this podcast, and that's why you're doing what you do, so we can help people to advocate for themselves. To, obviously you want people to have a good doctor, and we can't wait and just give our health over to the doctor. We
Hmm.
have to educate ourselves. And so I love what you do, because what you're teaching, especially in your latest book, Wild Remedies, we can learn how to support our body's ability to heal itself every day of the year. And then, go for your physical and see that you're getting healthier and healthier. Continue to work with good doctors, fire the bad ones, hire the good ones, and know that we have to take our health into our own hands. Um, so there you were. You had reversed Still's disease, a disease that, has no cure, and you'll have it for the rest of your life, and you'll die in your 40s, and you are very healthy and vibrant. How old are you now?
I'm actually turning 40 this year. So, yeah.
Yay! So you're an 80s kid. That's me
Yeah.
too. I just turned 40. So, and you're vibrant and healthy, and you're still free of all the symptoms of Still's
Yeah.
disease.
Yeah. I've never had them since.
Love it. I love it. That's so cool. Yes, autoimmune conditions can be reversed. I've had so many guests on the show who have reversed their own, and it is so inspiring, because people who are trapped in that vicious cycle of having autoimmune flare-ups have been told by so many specialists that this is their life, this is the new normal, and that they'll never really get better. And then they believe them,
Mhm.
right? And so it takes people like you to go to share with them that there is a possibility, there is a way that they can escape that prison, and have a body that's healthy and vibrant. So what had you want to write Wild Remedies?
It begins with a trip to Ireland, actually. In 2017, I'd published my first book, Alchemy of Herbs. And people had asked me, as soon as the first book was published, the question was, when are you going to write your second one? And I was just so burnt out from that process. I was like, never. I have no interest in that whatsoever. But I went to Ireland that year, and I was visiting a friend. And during that trip, I also got the chance to meet Tori Amos, who is my heroine. And she's a big influence in my life. She's a piano composer, singer, songwriter. And so I had the chance to meet her, and I gave her a copy of the book. And she asked me, how do you get the best results with herbs? And she kind of went on to ask something about like, should you take it, how do you take the herbs, etc. And at the time I was totally like, oh, I'm meeting Tori. She's asking me a question, but I hope I said something semi-intelligent to her. Something about bringing plants into our life, and that it's not just the one thing we do, but it's all the things we do. And so we had that conversation, and days later, I just kept thinking about that, that question from her, how do you get the best results from herbs? And I just really thought about it, and from so many different angles. And then it just hit me. It was one of those like things that just like landed in my lap, and it was so clear. And it was like, that's what you will write a book about. And then just after that, I thought, and I will write this book with Emily Hahn, who's a colleague of mine and now friend. And so I called her up and I said, we need to write a book about this. And she was like, okay, you're right. She knew too. So the book is really about, it's kind of getting back to my herbal roots. Because as I mentioned, I was first began learning in the field, learning with the plants themselves, and nature connection and observance was a really big part of my learnings. And then I kind of steered off onto this clinical herbalist path where the focus was more on herbs that you buy and formulas and, just kind of a different focus. And this book is coming back full round to really talk about the importance of nature connection, the healing that's found there on a personal level as we get to interact with nature, looking at the ecology that's outside of our doors, beyond even just us and the plants, but also all of the creatures there and all of just the beauty and wonder that's found within there. And being able to then participate in all of that and recognizing that as humans, we are a part of this earth and not apart from it. And learning how to kind of sink ourselves back into those rhythms. So living through the seasons, changing our habits or the things we do as the seasons change around us, and also learning to identify and recognize all of this plant medicine and plant foods that grow so abundantly around us. And so a lot of the book focuses on weeds because, one, that's what people find around them, but two, it's because I know that those weeds that show up so abundantly around us are the plants that can offer so much profound healing. Like you mentioned stinging nettle earlier. That stinging nettle is in both of my books, and I was just thinking about that today because that's one I would never want to be without. It has so many amazing healing properties, and in many locales grows abundantly, and it's just right out there, waiting to be interacted with.
Nice. I love it. That's so cool. Since launching your book, Wild Remedies, have you had any feedback from your listeners?
Oh,
I mean, from your readers?
Yes, absolutely. We've actually been doing a lot with the book. There's been just as far as we know, about 20,000 copies sold already, and we have a Facebook group, and there's just so much interaction going on there. People posting recipes, and I'm getting tagged on Instagram every day, numerous times a day, people making the recipes, which is so much fun to see, people getting out, people wondering, just what the plants are that are growing around them. And and we've had over 200 reviews so far on Amazon as well. So I've been getting lots of feedback, lots of emails. In fact, I spent this morning trying to go through my inbox again because I'm getting hundreds of emails every couple of days, and it's been really, really wonderful and a lot to take in too. So
very cool. Any specific feedback you've gotten from Wild Remedies that stands out? Any stories of success you'd like to share?
Well, at this point, with the book being less than a month old, I think that most of the feedback has come around the joy that people are experiencing of going outside. And right now, a lot of people are still sheltering in place and, practicing social distancing, which can feel isolating, which can, be depressing on some level, and certainly just even anxiety about the state of the world we're in. And a big part of the book is about getting out and using awareness and observation to see all the beauty that's out there, whether it's, again, like beautiful flowering plants or the little snails that are sliding along the leaves. And so in general, that's the biggest feedback that I've seen so far, is people being able to set down their feelings of isolation, set down anxiety, set down the sadness, and take a step out into the world. And when I say, interacting with the plants around them, I happen to live in the wilderness, but my co-author, Emily, she lives in LA, and we wanted the book to be very applicable to everybody, whether they're in a suburban or urban or rural environment. And that's what I'm hearing from people too, is one of the exercises in the book is to find nature in unexpected places, especially for those urban dwellers and people finding beauty out there, even if they live in a land that has a lot of concrete. There's nature is always there, and the plants are always there, creatures are always there, and being able to observe that and feel that. And that's been definitely the biggest feedback, and something that I've even, because the book has been on my mind, and something I've been really tapping into too. It's sometimes I don't realize how anxious or worried I've become with everything that's going on, or just even, sadness, missing my friends, and or plans that didn't get to play out this year, all of that, and worry for people on the front lines. And I don't even realize how much I'm holding that in until I go outside and I take a walk and I take time to slow down and see all of that. And I feel like that connection to nature, it's something I'm sure so many of us are aware of, but it's so easy to, kind of to just be like, yeah, nature connection. Sure. But, there's so many studies these days about showing how important being outside is, and how that really plays a powerful role in our overall mental well-being. And there's been some popular headlines in the news from time to time, people showing that like doctors in certain countries are prescribing nature in order to help people. And it's really based on studies, like there was a 2015 Stanford University research study, and it looked at the brain activity of people who went on a local nature walk, and it compared it with those who walked on a high traffic street. And the conclusion was that walking in nature could lead to a lower risk for depression and other mental illnesses. There's another study that looked at 1,000 residents in Sweden. And in that study, the researchers concluded that the more often people visited urban green spaces, so again, it doesn't have to be like some idealistic, mountaintop or anything, but urban green spaces, the less often those people reported stress-related illnesses. They reported less burnout, less insomnia, fatigue, depression, and even feelings of panic. So there's lots of information out there showing how important nature is in terms of that like scientific realm. And I think that's so fascinating to look at. I like to talk about it, remind people about it. But I think when we get out there and have that moment of feeling, more calm, more centered, more peaceful, feeling that in our bodies, how joyful it can be, that is kind of the biggest proof, right? Like we can look to the studies and find them interesting, but when we feel it in our bodies, I think that's the most profound. And to have that joy and be able to say, yes, I want more of this, and to make it a regular habit, that becomes really, really important. So yeah, there's, so many studies looking at even, stress hormones specifically, and how you can reduce those even by just 20 minutes outside, can significantly reduce stress hormones. And tell you what, Ashley, I think a lot of people could use that right now.
Well, if we took your book, Wild Remedies, and we went outside, I could go in my backyard. I live on 5 acres, sort of out in the woods in Snohomish. And this is just like 30 minutes away from Seattle. Or those who don't have that luxury of being out in the woods like me could go to their local park, or just find trails, find places where there's trees and grass and nature, and go for a walk and see if they could find, it's kind of like an adult scavenger hunt, like a holistic scavenger hunt. see if they how many wild remedies they can find in their neighborhood. And what's really exciting about stinging nettles is that they grow everywhere. I thought they only were in the Pacific Northwest until I started looking into them, and they're everywhere.
Hmm.
Let's start with stinging nettles.
Hmm.
Tell us about stinging nettles. Why would we want to forage for them and use them, especially now since that this is the time to harvest them?
Hmm. Yeah, this is the time of stinging nettle. In fact, later today, that is what I'm going to be doing, is harvesting stinging nettle myself. Well, with nettle, the thing that like just jumps out immediately with nettle is how nutrient dense it is. And I think many of us know that our modern day fruits and vegetables, ones that are commonly found in the grocery store, often have less nutrients or even missing nutrients from their former selves. And we, tend to breed out nutrients by making fruit sweeter or tastier in some way. If you think of like the original tomato was not anything like what we know today. They were small and they had a very different taste. And over time, we've bred them to be bigger and bigger and juicier and sweeter. But in that situation, we've also bred out a lot of the nutrients. We can also lose nutrients because of monoculture farming and growing crops in nutrient depleted soils. Obviously, if the nutrients aren't in our soils, they aren't in our food. So, whatever the reason, many of our foods just don't contain the vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients that they once did. And stinging nettle is a great way to get those nutrients back into our lives because they are one of the most nutrient dense plants out there. And so just eating them, having them as teas, they are just so chock full of minerals and vitamins. And so they bring us a lot in that regard. And because of that, getting that potent nutrient intake, especially if we're eating them or taking a strong tea regularly, they have a lot of vitamins and nutrients specifically for bones. And so I'll often say there's the side effect of eating nettles includes things like stronger, more luxurious hair, stronger nails and teeth, healthier bones, because they really do affect that in a strong way. So that deep nourishment is a really important reason to enjoy nettle, and a reason why I think most people can really benefit from enjoying nettles. And they are quite tasty too. So that's a fun aspect of them, to be able to enjoy those nutrients in this delicious green. They kind of, they do not taste like kale and they do not taste like spinach, but it's in that same kind of genre of this, dark leafy green that has just so many vitamins and minerals in there. Another reason that nettles is incredibly important for many of us today is that regularly using them can help us reduce or modulate inflammation. And it can do that in a variety of ways. One way that I commonly recommend it to people is for seasonal allergies, which is, it's kind of this inflammatory response going on. And nettles can help modulate that response. And they do that in interesting ways. You could be drinking nettle tea prior to whenever your allergy season starts. And many people report that when they do that, their allergy symptoms that year are lessened. So that's one way to just kind of prevent that process from happening. And I love that is, I can only imagine all the processes that must be going on in the body to make that happen, and just all the inflammation that's being modulated. So people are seeing results with their seasonal allergies, but must be feeling it, in their bodies on many different levels. You can also take something like freeze-dried nettle, and that can be used for acute allergy symptoms, again, modulating that inflammation. There's been a couple of really cool studies looking at how a fresh alcohol extract of nettle leaves can reduce inflammation and blood glucose levels in people with type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. And I'm sure I don't need to tell your listeners that there's a whole approach to working with people and helping to reverse that process. So I don't mean to say that nettles are the one quick, stop solution, but they can be a part of an overall protocol. And one of the studies that looked at that fresh alcohol extract for people with type 2 diabetes, they concluded that nettle may decrease risk factors for cardiovascular incidents and other complications in patients with type 2 diabetes. So it's kind of like it can lower the blood glucose, but it's seen in decreasing risk factors for cardiovascular health as well. Another way that it can help modulate inflammation is with musculoskeletal pain. And again, it's high in vitamins and nutrients, and sometimes the depletion of those vitamins and nutrients can lead to musculoskeletal pain. So by having that restored, that can affect things. It's really high in magnesium, calcium, and so that's one way. And there's also another kind of strange way. So if everyone knows what we're talking about, stinging nettles, they do sting, right? That's where they get their name. If you brush up against them with your bare skin, they will sting you. They have these little kind of needle-like prickles all over them, especially on the stems and underneath the leaves. And what those do is they're like these hollow point needles, and when you brush up against them, they actually inject your skin with their special little juice there, and you will have a mild reaction. It can be a little rash, and it could be a little painful, a little itchy. It's very mild, though it's not that big of a deal unless you really go for it. But we know that the sting of fresh nettle can actually bring blood flow to an area, can bring healing hormones, and will decrease pain. That's an old folkloric use of stories of women going off into the forest to harvest stinging nettles, fresh stinging nettles to help with their arthritic hands. But that researchers have actually looked into this too. And there was 2 studies done showing that fresh nettle brushed up against, one study was the thumb and one study was the knees, and both showed that that can reduce pain and inflammation, which I just thought was kind of hilarious, actually. Like, can you imagine like calling in for that, to be a volunteer for that study? Like, yes, you can whip me with fresh nettles. Sure, here's my thumb, here's my knee. But yes, those we do know, from tradition and science that fresh nettle sting is actually therapeutic. People can get kind of worried about getting that sting. For myself, like, I don't have arthritis and stuff, so I don't necessarily go looking for that sting. So when I harvest fresh nettles, I do wear gloves and that sort of thing. But I often do get stung just because I'm, like brush up against it with my arms or something. It's really not that big of a deal. So, but in terms of eating it, just because I know people often wonder about this, when you eat the nettles, you want to blanch them. Which immediately gets rid of the sting with them. So it's eating them is not an unpleasant experience once you blanch them. They get rid of their sting.
And for those who don't know what blanching is, you put them in hot water, and that's what blanching is. So you can steam them, or you can put them in a soup, or you can put them in hot water to make a tea, and then they no longer sting you. Roman soldiers used to, however many thousands of years ago, Roman soldiers used to rub their body with stinging nettles in order to stay warm at night. And I thought that was interesting, because that sting does bring blood to the surface, makes you feel warm, but I'm sure it would also help with their aches and pains from just being soldiers, which is really cool. I wonder if they also ate them, rubbed their bodies with them and then ate them.
Yeah, would not surprise me. Yeah, I was in France a few years ago. My husband's French, and we go visit his family, and we were in central France, near in the same area where the caves of Lascaux are. Those very ancient caves, and with all of the art there. And so we were kind of walking around these caves, and I found all of these stinging nettles there. And I believe those caves, that they believe that people were living in the caves like 35,000 years ago. And to find all of these nettles growing around the caves, it really made me think of like, wow, I wonder, it's probably impossible to imagine like how long nettles and humans have been interacting together.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, and it's considered a weed. And it's also high in K2. You mentioned the minerals. It's also, so it really is great for joints and helping the body build healthy bones, because the K2 is needed along with those minerals in order to lay new bone tissue. and then you're out in the sun getting vitamin D, and
Mm-hmm.
that completes the perfect picture.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's high in antioxidants and polyphenols, so it's just a fantastic food all around, and it's free. We just have to go outside and find it, and it is in every area. I mean, I can't think of an area it wouldn't, other than like the Antarctic. I mean, it's in stinging nettles are in, aren't they in Asia and Africa, and aren't they everywhere in North and South America? Aren't they everywhere?
They do grow in many places. I'm not sure about all of those areas. I mean, I'm not saying that they don't. I just don't know about that myself, but it would not surprise me. And there's several
Right.
species of nettles as well. Like we have our native species and other species that have moved in, and but they find their niches where they like to grow. They like really protein dense soils, and they do like a bit of shade. But they also like a little bit of sun. So you can find them in forests, along the edge of meadows. And once they've settled themselves in their little niche, they can do quite well there.
Mm. I interviewed naturopathic physician Dr. Jen Daisy, who specializes in teaching botany at Bastyr University. She wrote a book called Naturopathic Gardening, and
Hmm.
she has this theory about soil and weeds. You know, weeds are herbs, which is what you're teaching. And she says that when this earth is disrupted, it's sort of like a wound. Like, let's say we scratched ourselves and our skin is broken and we're bleeding, right? That's a wound. And the body creates this scab over top so that it can build new skin. Well, when the earth is disrupted, the earth, it's like an open wound, and the earth wants to immediately create like a poultice and a scab to heal the exposed earth. And so it brings in fast growing weeds as some of the first uh plants to heal that opened or disturbed soil, much like our body would. And when she said that, it was just it changed my opinion about
Hmm.
weeds, right? From being these pests to being like the healers of the planet and our bodies also. So oftentimes stinging nettles will grow where earth has been disturbed as well, or nearby. So I thought that was really neat. What other wild remedies are really common? You know, like dandelion. We could talk about dandelion. Everyone knows dandelion. Yeah, let's talk about dandelion, and then tell us more about ones that maybe we don't know, which are in our backyard.
Sure. Well, dandelion is one that I love to talk about. And in terms of healing the earth, that is just the perfect example. So it's a great segue herb there. Dandelion has this very deep taproot that goes into the earth, and it pulls up nutrients and then brings those nutrients into the soil around it, as well as the plant itself, and then also helps to break up hard packed soil as well. So it can help aerate the soils, bring nutrients from deeper in the earth back up into the topsoil. So it's a wonderful healer in that regard. And yeah, that's one, people tend, we have some lawn purists out there who tend to hate dandelions. I think many of us were just taught to, it was just like we didn't question it. We were just told like dandelions bad. And then they should be removed from lawns. And billions of pounds of herbicides are poured onto dandelions specifically every year, mainly by homeowners in the attempt to find that
Mm.
perfect lawn, which is it's ironic on so many levels, because one, we've been basically taught to poison the earth that we live on, which is just horrific to me. But also,
Mm-hmm.
so many of those chemicals that are used are known to be carcinogenic and can promote the growth of cancer and increase the incidence of cancer. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
dandelion is a herb that is widely celebrated for helping people who do have cancer. So that's kind of an
Mm.
interesting thing there, that so many people are poisoning it poisoning a plant that so many of us could benefit from these days. And dandelion, like stinging nettle, is wonderful food as well as wonderful medicine. The first medicine I think it brings is joy. Personally, I would just see the dandelion coming out of a crack in a sidewalk. I just love that sign of kind of resilience and this idea of, finding beauty in all these places, and that, dandelion can take root there and to grow. Those right now on my lawn and around here, I live in an agricultural area. And so there's dandelions and lots of agricultural fields, and those yellow blossoms will just fill a whole area. And I just think that is so beautiful. I mean, it's reminiscent of like the tulip fields in Amsterdam. It's that beautiful. They're so prolific and so gorgeous. And so that's really fun, just that joy there. And if we wait a little while, then of course those flowers will go to seed, and then the plant gives us free wishes. Another joyful thing. So many things to celebrate with dandelion. And as food, all parts of the plant can be used as food. The roots can be used as food. As I mentioned, they are nutrient dense. They pulled up all those, great riches from deep down in the earth. And the roots have a bit of a bitter flavor to them. And I like to pickle them or put them in stir fries if I'm eating them as food. The roots are tremendous for the liver. That's kind of their claim to fame, is that they really help the liver function well. And so I regularly enjoy dandelion roots, even though I don't have known liver issues, just as a way of supporting my liver health, because that little organ of ours does so much. So I think the more that we can give it a little boost and support its healthy functions, the better. And so eating the root is great, but probably my favorite thing to do with dandelion roots is to chop them up, roast them, then simmer them and make what some people call dandelion coffee. It doesn't really taste like coffee, but it does, because you roast the roots. It does have this like rich roasted flavor that's kind of reminiscent of coffee. So essentially you're making a tea, but it does have a little more of like a oomph to it. That's one of my favorite ways to enjoy dandelion. It just tastes so delicious. So that's a great way to just enjoy it as food and as medicine and support for the liver. It's also often added to bitters blends, and the leaves are used as bitters too. So might as well talk about bitters, which is one of my favorite topics. And in herbal medicine, the bitter taste of herbs is really important. So many of our foods today I've talked about this earlier with stinging nettle. We've bred our foods to be sweeter, oftentimes is what we're going for. And we've often removed the bitter flavor from food. So you think about wild or like wild salad greens versus iceberg lettuce. There's so many salad greens out there that are making a comeback today that have that bitter flavor to them. But, I grew up eating iceberg lettuce. That was kind of like, that was the salad that you ate was iceberg lettuce. Even romaine lettuce, which is kind of has a little bit better nutrient value than the iceberg lettuce, still does not have a lot of flavor. But that bitter flavor is so incredibly important. It signals to our whole body that nutrients are along the way, and we need to get started and ready for it. So, for example, if you can think of having something that's bitter, and a great example is a dandelion leaf, if someone happens to have chewed on that, but any bitter flavor will do. What happens when you have the bitter flavor is that you immediately start to salivate more. And that saliva then helps to break down carbohydrates, and it begins that whole digestive process. And then it creates this whole cascade of events that gets our digestive system up and moving, releases hydrochloric acid in the stomach, pancreatic enzymes are released from that, peristalsis is stimulated. The bitter flavor also stimulates the release of bile from the gallbladder, as well as the production of bile in the liver. So bitter taste is like 101 for our digestive system. And herbalists, we love to talk about how so many of our modern day digestive issues could be traced back to a bitter deficiency syndrome, which is basically that we aren't eating bitter things that's helped to stimulate our appetite. And so dandelion leaves are a great way to do that, as are the roots, as I mentioned. And this time of year with these greens in the springtime, those greens can be younger and fresh, tender, and they have a bitter taste, but it's not like overwhelming. Like it's not like take a bite and make a face kind of bitter. It's more of just like, there's kind of a spark to it almost. It's definitely an enlivening taste because there is a little something there. And dandelion greens have been used as a bitter, some people call it like a bitter tonic, but like a bitter springtime digestive aid for so many years. And, it's a big tradition in Europe that goes back thousands of years, undoubtedly. My husband, he says he remembers going out in the springtime with his mother to wild fields and harvesting dandelion leaves. And that was just something you always did. Like everybody knew to do that. Even he grew up, his family's from the Alps, and in the Alps they have really, traditionally heavy foods in the wintertime, preserved meats and lots of cheeses and potatoes. So really heavy foods, and the bitters, eating bitters and drinking bitter drinks is a tradition that still lives on there. And I can see why it would just need to, you need that kind of bitter oomph if you're going to eat that really heavy food for a long period of time. But yeah, so this time of year, having those bitter greens is a great way to get digestion going. And one of my favorite ways to do that is a dandelion pesto. You basically make a pesto like you'd make a basil pesto, but you make it with dandelions, and it's slightly bitter, but you've added some lemon juice, some salt, some nuts, and kind of tames it a little bit. But I often bring that to potlucks and share it with friends, and it's a great conversation starter, because people are like, what is that? It's always a crowd pleaser, and you get to talk to people about how amazing dandelion is, and hopefully, if somebody's there who's still spraying dandelions, it can open up a conversation to why people might want to stop doing that on so many different levels, but mainly the joy of having free food available to you, like the dandelion pesto. And then the flowers, of course, are gorgeous too. They're high in lutein, beta carotene, so they're also nutrient dense. I didn't mention that about the leaves, but the leaves are high in potassium, phosphorus, calcium, also beta carotene. And the leaves and roots are also really high in inulin, that prebiotic that is so wonderful for our healthy gut flora as well. So there's so many reasons to enjoy those. But yes, the flowers, again, joyful, and those are edible too. I love this time of year when they're so plentiful. I love adding them to salads. Yesterday I made a soka bread, which is a chickpea flour-based bread, and I decorated it with dandelion flowers and violet flowers and dandelion leaves, and made this like pretty botanical scape on top of the bread, and that was really fun. So they're like joyful to add these, and people make all sorts of things with the dandelion flowers too, from jams and jellies and all sorts of preserves as well. Yeah.
Whoa, that's awesome. So we can eat the flower, the leaves, the root. What about the stem?
Yeah, the stem is filled with this milky latex that is especially bitter. So it's not very fun to eat. But that is a kind of folkloric remedy for warts. And so you harvest that stem, and like if you break off the stem, you'll see it immediately exude this milky sap. It's kind of sticky, and you apply that to warts every day. So the thing with that is has to be super consistent, and I often recommend internal things as well. But so there's still, even though we don't want to eat the stem necessarily, there's it also offers some medicinal benefits, which I just love that with dandelion. It is so incredibly generous. It's beautiful, it's joyful, it's food, it's medicine, it's abundant. We could go on and on about dandelion.
I'm so excited because my son loves eating everything in nature, and so now I can tell him he can eat dandelion flowers. Is there any contraindications for eating dandelions at all that we should know about?
No, there's not. The thing about the flowers is that the petals themselves are kind of sweet to blandish, and that actually a flower head is filled with a whole bunch of those. Are actually every little petal you see is an individual flower. So it's the flower head. And then below it, there's these green parts, the bracts and the sepals. Those are kind of bitter. And so you can eat them. It's not they're fine, but for a sensitive palate, they might find that those green bits are kind of more too bitter. So you can separate those if you want. But that's really the only thing. And then of course, because so many people do spray, you just want to make sure you're harvesting from a good area. So that's another thing. One thing is that if you do eat a lot of the leaves and the roots, they are really high in inulin, which can cause some digestive discomfort if somebody eats like a whole bunch of them. but also diets that are high in inulin can reduce blood sugar levels and insulin levels. And so if somebody is type 2 diabetic and is needing to strictly monitor that, they would just want to keep that in mind. But of course, I'm in favor of using plant medicine instead of the medications when possible. And so that could be a way even to bring healthy healing foods into your life and reduce dependence on those things.
Love it. Very cool. Inulin also, yeah, it helps with. I love that it helps with feeding the gut the food it needs to make healthy gut biome, and then it also helps with the blood sugar balance. And you talked about how it's so supportive. The roots are so supportive to the liver. I used to have liver problems. I had inflamed liver. My liver was sticking out.
Wow.
You could actually see my liver stick out. Yeah, it was really bad. And I felt a difference when I drank roasted dandelion root tea. I would drink that all the time, and I really noticed a difference. And I drink there was some blend with burdock root and dandelion together, but I would actually feel a difference. My liver inflammation would go down drinking it all the time. So there was something to that. I thought that was really interesting. And in my local grocery store, it's like a health food store / grocery store. They sell they often sell this time of year wild harvested dandelion leaves in the lettuce section. So for people who can't go out and harvest their own lettuce, harvest their own dandelion leaves, they actually sell it. I always think that's interesting. Um, Another reason not to spray, besides the fact that people are giving themselves, their dogs and their children cancer by spraying pesticides in their backyard to kill the beautiful dandelions. Dandelions are great for supporting the bees. And we're at a very fragile point right now where if we lose our bees, we lose, I believe, a third of our food supply won't be pollinated. And the other third of our food chain is pollinated by bats. And by continuing to spray and kill off weeds, we're harming the pollinators, and thus we're going to end our own food supply. I mean, that is such a huge problem. So by stopping spraying and embracing these beautiful weeds that are then supporting our pollinators, we're supporting our own health and the ecology of the planet. So there's many reasons why we should stop spraying and instead embrace. These dandelions are beautiful, and if we see them as healing plants instead of as pests, then healing for us and also supportive of the bees, then we'll be changing our mindset for a holistic mindset. You mentioned earlier magic bullet. No one herb is a magic bullet. And that's a really interesting mindset. The mindset that, there's a magic bullet out there for something, like, oh, just give me the prescription, give me the penicillin, right? Just give me the magic bullet and let me get back to my life. Let me just, chemically alter my world, like to change my lawn, to change my body. Let's just give me the magic bullet. That mindset was marketed to us for over 100 years. Before penicillin came out, people, when they were sick, would take a month-long vacation if they could, and go to a place of healing where they could rest and recover, or they'd spend weeks or months recovering their health and using herbs. And then penicillin came along, and it was marketed as this magic bullet. Here's drugs. Drugs are the magic bullet. You don't need to forage in the woods anymore. You don't need to rest anymore. You don't need to take care of your body and do hydrotherapy and take herbs, all that backwater stuff. Now we've got this modern stuff. And so here, take this magic bullet. And in over 100 years of marketing has led us several generations into this thinking that we can just sit back and wait to get sick and can then chemically alter our bodies or our reality with a magic bullet. And that's just not the case. I know our listeners agree with me that there's no magic bullet, that is simply a fantasy world that we've been marketed to, and that gaining and maintaining true health requires diligence, requires us taking action and questioning the reality that we were raised in. And so questioning this reality, like, why do you spray your lawn? Well, because my parents did and because my neighbors do, and that's just what we do. Well, let's question that reality. Question the reality of, why do you consider these weeds to be pests instead of herbs, right? So we need to the change starts with questioning the reality we have and the belief system we've been raised in, and instead looking at the world through a different lens, through your lens, through the lens of how we can use nature around us to heal us. So I'm really excited about your book, because I think that teaching everyone how to forage healing foods and to craft their own herbal medicine is probably one of the most empowering things we can do right now. But it does start with changing our mindset, because if people are still in the mindset of looking for the magic bullet to chemically alter their environment or their body, they're not going to see the world filled with natural remedies. They're going to see this world where they have to chemically alter it to their liking. Um, and so we just have to start to shift our thinking. But I'd love for everyone to embrace weeds as herbs and respect them, and try to foster them and love them instead of spray them. So I'm excited that you brought that up. Now, tell us about some more really common um, wild herbs that are available that we may not even realize, like dandelions, which are so powerful.
Oh, before we move to the next herb, I loved everything you just said. Actually, I was nodding my head up and down a lot. One of the main themes in the book that was so important to my co-author, Emily, and I, is the theme of recognizing interdependence, and which is basically what we're talking about right now. And we mean that on so many different levels. A big part of the book is understanding how to forage for plants really ethically and sustainably, so we can rely on future harvests and make the world around, help to make the world around us a better place, more resilient plant populations, etc. But recognizing the interdependence there of not only the pollinators, as you were talking about, and dandelions is a really fun way to observe all of the different plants that rely on them, or all the different creatures that rely on the dandelions, from the bees, like you mentioned, to violets. I often find ladybugs growing on them, or crawling around on them. And there's also some surprising ones too. There's, in addition to honeybees, there's also native bees, bee flies, hoverflies. They all love the dandelions. Small birds, including goldfinches and sparrows, will eat the seeds. Mammals also forage for the dandelions. Rabbits, groundhogs, pocket gophers, deer, elk, even bears are known to eat dandelions. So there's so much going on with this, and we are all on this circle together. So like you said, we poison the earth around us. Not only is there not dandelions to help heal us, but then there's the dandelion, the poisons that we're dealing with our children, our animals, and then all of the creatures there. So this is a really important message, and it is a mind shift on so many levels. And that's a big part of Wild Remedies too, is that it's not simply about using dandelion roots for your liver, which is powerful and so important, but also recognizing all of this, all of the interdependence, the reciprocity that we can give back to the world around us. That's an important part of the medicine, and I think a really important part of what we all need to hear right now, because that mindset shift is one of the most crucial things in terms of overall healing for ourselves and the planet as well. So yeah, it was all beautifully said. Thank you for that. And in terms of the other plants, we could talk about the one that comes to mind first is plantain. Plantain is this weed that's low growing to the earth. It loves to grow on those disturbed soils. And we definitely think of it as like a band-aid. It takes these like downtrodden, disturbed soils, especially where people love to walk, and it'll just thrive there. Plantain was actually the very first weed that I learned when I started on this journey. I was in a class and I was learning about how to make lip balms and healing salves. And the teacher started talking about plantain. And I had lived in the Dominican Republic where we ate lots of plantain, the banana-like fruit. And so she started talking about plantain and how abundant it was. And I was like, wait, what? Plantain grows here? It's like this tropical plant. Like, I just couldn't believe it. And she's like, oh yeah, I remember she said, it's right out on the driveway. It's everywhere on the driveway. And I was like, really? And she's like, yeah, let's go see. And so we went up to the driveway and checked it out. And then I got to know plantain, which is a Plantago genus. Not the fruit, not the plantain fruit. It's not related to banana. It's not related.
It's not related at all.
Yeah.
There's no
relation whatsoever.
Of no relation.
Yeah, completely different genus for plantain, the banana plantain. So
you were so disappointed.
Yeah, I was definitely like, oh, okay. But that's definitely, that was day one of my herbal learning experience, and I started off as completely newbie and learned about plantain. So yeah, plantain. I'm sure if people don't know what I mean when I say plantain, I'm sure you would recognize it. And if I pointed it out to you, then you would probably start to see it everywhere.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I just searched for it, broadleaf plantain, and I'm like, yeah, I pulled a few of those out of my garden for sure. Yeah. And I'm from, I don't know if you call Toronto Eastern Canada, but I guess you'd consider that Eastern. So I'm from the other side of North America. Now I'm living, just outside of Seattle in the Pacific Northwest. And I remember growing up, and I remember there was a plant that looked just like this. And it's just these broad leaves that are all kind of sprouting out. And then there's these little things that shoot up and they have those seeds on them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they have a very prolific seed head. And the leaves, there's several different species, and many of them are used interchangeably. The broadleaf is the one you're looking at. There's also a narrow-leafed one that's very common, but they both have these very prominent parallel leaf veins that stick out. So that's an easy way to identify them. But yeah, plantain loves to grow where people walk. There are some native species here in North America, but most of what we see are weeds that were brought over from Europe, and they quickly earned the name white man's footstep because they would be found growing in like the wagons trails as white people headed west. So it's very prolific, and like I said, it'll grow and it'll thrive in places that many plants would not. So yeah, it's an easy weed to dismiss. It's common, it's ubiquitous, but man, this thing is a powerful healer. Plantain is really powerful for acute situations as well as chronic situations. So I love that because I just love how versatile it is. For acute situations, it's very famous for helping with bee stings or wasp stings, any kind of insect stings. And it can really soothe that painful bite or sting. And it can work right away. And so basically what you do is you get a bee sting, wasp sting, whatever the case, and you harvest a leaf and you chew it up and kind of make a mush poultice out of it, and then place that over the sting. And it will take out that sting and the pain immediately, and it will greatly reduce the redness and swelling. It is so amazing. So I've used it like that many times, but it'd been quite a few years since I'd used it. And just last summer, I got stung by a wasp, and gosh, that's so painful. And I was one of those like, ow, I didn't realize what was happening. And I figured it out and just headed over to the plantain patch and started putting poultices on and changing them out like every 20 minutes. And the pain relief was almost instantaneous. And then the redness and swelling was not that bad for a wasp. So that one is just a good one that everyone could know. It works great for kids. I think not only is it like actually reducing their pain, but the idea of like chewing up a leaf and putting it on your body, like kids often like that, and it kind of distracts them from the situation as well. So, and once kids know it, man, I have been around so many kids that are just like, they know, like they get stung and they'll just go for the plantain leaf themselves. And lots of stories of kids even helping out their parents, like, oh, you got stung. Let me find you a plantain leaf. once you know how to recognize it, it's super easy to find, and just, yeah, it's so wonderful for that. Another great attribute it has for acute situations is it's what we call a vulnerary herb, which is a wound healing herb. And so it can promote the knitting of tissues together and the healing of tissues. So we can use it on all sorts of things like cuts and scrapes, burns, blisters, all of those things. A great, first aid application for that. And again, it can be used as a poultice. It can also be used as a salve, which is where you make a remedy where you infuse an oil with plantain leaves, and then once that's really well infused, then you strain off the leaves and add a little beeswax and make a salve with it. That's one of my most used salves because it's great for just about anything. And yeah, so it's a really powerful healer in that regard too. But as I mentioned, it's also great for chronic conditions. And that ability to heal skin and knit tissues back together is also really great for our digestive tract. And I'm glad we've already talked about no, silver bullet miracle cure with herbs, because that's definitely not how I teach about herbs, but they can be, a powerful part of an overall healing process. And I often recommend plantain for people who have suspicions of having a leaky gut or intestinal permeability. And that, again, we want to be using the nutrients. We want to be thinking about diet really carefully. But plantain can also be used as a way to help heal the digestive tract all the way through. So you can also use it for any kind of inflammatory bowel disease. So basically any kind of inflamed tissues, whether that's on the outside or through our digestive tract, plantain is really fabulous for that. And I like it for that as a tea. You drink a strong tea of the plantain, it's kind of like bathing all of your tissues in your digestive tract with these healing abilities. You can also use it as like a mouth rinse and use it to heal mouth wounds, like a canker sore, for example, for acid reflux where tissues are inflamed. So lots of ways to use that internally, but it's one that I use all the time for that. And then another way that I rely on plantain a lot is for coughs. And plantain works really well for a particular kind of cough. And that's that dry, hacking cough that can be really painful and just seem like endless. And it's kind of like, I'll often get this kind of cough at the end of a cold or a flu. And it's like I lay down at night and I'm ready to, drift off into sleep. And then I'll just start coughing and I can't stop. So plantain is perfect for that kind of cough. It just soothes that coughing reflex, helps reduce the inflammation that's going on there, and just stops that spasmodic coughing. It's also really great for coughing due to particles in the air, like dust or wildfire smoke. When when the wildfires have been bad and the smoke has been in the air really thick, I often rely on plantain as well as another plant, mullein, to help with that, just restoring lung health and helping reduce that irritation that's going on in the lungs. So yeah, plantain is one that just grows at our feet and is so easy to dismiss, but it's one of my most used herbs and has so many healing abilities within it.
Very interesting. It's one of those things, one of those weeds I never thought was worth its time being being in my garden, and now, boy, am I wrong. That's so cool. That's so cool. So what else? What other wild herbs or / weeds? What weeds should we stop thinking of as weeds and start thinking of as herbs?
All of them. Absolutely all of them. Well, another one that comes to mind is mallow. Mallow is in the Malva genus, and it also loves to grow in disturbed soils like all of these do, and it can often be the bane of gardeners. Gardeners especially seem to hate this plant and want to pull it up, but it also is wonderful food, wonderful medicine, and now, it is definitely seen as an invasive weed, but historically was a highly prized medicinal as well as food. So it's interesting how these things can change. But I rarely see a gardener who gives a whoop of gratitude when they see mallow in their garden. It's usually the other way around. But I still feel that big surge of gratitude when I see it because it is so generous in its food and medicine. So mallow, when you make a tea out of mallow, the result is this kind of thick I hate to use the word slimy because people don't really think like, slimy, I want some of that. But it is kind of like this mucilaginous, slimy, gooey result is this tea. And basically, we call that in the herbal world, it's demulcent. But basically, all this mucilaginous properties have come out into the tea. It's similar, to aloe vera. The insides of aloe vera plant is demulcent. Even if you just make up some oatmeal and it becomes kind of like gloopy, that's also demulcent quality. But basically, it's a thick substance that's very soothing and very cooling. And so I mentioned that plantain is great for those dry, irritated coughs. I often combine it with mallow and mullein, as I also mentioned, but I often combine it with mallow because it has that additional softening, soothing, cooling, moistening properties. So you can imagine, I love to talk about coughs because I grew up thinking like, I have a cough, that's bad, take cough syrup, okay. And basically the cough syrup, is relaxing those muscles and just stopping the cough from happening. But in herbalism, we really want to know what is the type of cough and then how can we help support the body's healing process. So in this situation, if somebody is coughing because of irritation, because of dryness, but if we just stop the cough, then that means that the dryness is still continuing and that irritation is still continuing. Oftentimes, if there's dryness and irritation, there's inflammation that's still continuing. And so we can use herbs instead of just stopping the coughing reflex. We can use them to support, soothing those tissues, relieving the irritation, relieving the dryness. And mallow is just so amazing for this. And I use it, as I mentioned, for wildfire smoke in the air, even just the dryness of summer or the dryness of winter when we have the heating going on and drying the air. All of those things can be, bring dryness to the lungs. And mallow is a great way to just soothe them in a really gentle way. So any of that hot, dry, dusty, smoky air, mallow is just amazing for that. Another time we can have that dryness and irritation causing us problems is sore throats, like with a cold or a flu symptom, or just the dryness again of smoke or dry air. And again, that mallow is soothing, it's moistening, it has that thick substance to it, and just can be really relieving of all that kind of irritation. And mallow, which is high in polysaccharides, and those polysaccharides are known to have immunomodulating activity as well. So they can help body, strengthen the immune system, ward off an infection. So that's all wonderful ways to use it. It's used historically, was used for wounds, and that's a way we continue to use it today. It was famous historically for wounds, and today I often use it not only externally, but I mentioned plantain actually internally to heal digestive issues, and mallow is really great for that as well, and I often combine the two of those. It makes great food if you're familiar with mallow, and if you aren't, if you're listening to this, just do a browser search for mallow and find it. Malva neglecta is one of the common ones, but there's species that grow all over, and I bet you'll recognize it because it's so common. And in the late summer, it produces these fruits that I was told to call them cheese wheels because they do kind of look like a cheese wheel, but they're really cool tasting. Well, they're really cooling, I should say, and they taste great. And they have kind of like there's a crunch to them. And so they're really fun to add to like salads, just as like a different textural kind of thing. But they are pretty tasty and delicious. I have a recipe in the book for roasted dandelion roots and those mallow cheese wheels and roasting them with apples and cinnamon. It's a fun wild foods treat. And so great food and medicine. And again, that soothing quality of the mallow is just so important. And I love how that is as herbal medicine. It's just so practical. It's like, oh, I have heat and dryness. I'm going to take this thing that's really cooling and soothing. And it works so well as that. And once you get used to using your medicine like that, there's just no going back. You'll know that you need mallow in your life.
I love it. Oh, I'm excited to learn more. There's a weed in my garden, and I don't think there's any herbal. There's no chance this thing could be herbally helpful at all because it's like I think the devil himself made this weed. Creeping buttercup.
Yeah, so that family, the ranunculae family, They have some great medicinals in there,
No
but there
way.
are like within that family, but a lot of the buttercups aren't known to be used medicinally.
Yeah.
They are, when they bloom early in the year, that is pretty fun. But yeah, I don't know a lot of medicinal uses for that particular plant.
Okay, so I'm just gonna keep pulling it out of my
Yeah,
garden.
especially because I know where you live, it can like just really want to take over, and so
It takes over.
yeah,
Right? Yeah, I'm constantly fighting it. But it's worth it to be able to have our own garden filled with beautiful fruits and vegetables is totally worth it.
Mhm.
Um, you're less into gardening and more into wild crafting. I was gonna ask you a gardening question.
Actually, I have
How
quite a big garden.
you
I
do?
do.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you manage slugs? How do you get rid of slugs?
Oh, well, here, I have the best secret for managing slugs.
I thought you would.
Move to the other side of the mountains. Then you don't get slugs.
I was wondering if you had slugs in Eastern Washington.
Yeah.
That's so funny. When we first moved here, I'm from Toronto. I'm from Ontario, the province of Ontario in Canada, where we have Michigan and the East Coast. We have really bad insects in the summertime. And when we first moved here, there was no screen door on our balcony and I kept saying we need to get a screen if we're ever going to open this door in the summertime. We need to get a screen. And my husband, who's from here, was like, "What do you mean we need to get a screen?" And I'm like freaking out thinking we're going to be eaten alive by mosquitoes and black flies. And come the spring and come the summer, there was no mosquitoes. And I rarely, like once in a blue moon, I'll see a mosquito and there's no black flies here. And I thought this is crazy because my entire existence, I thought the planet was covered. I thought the whole northern hemisphere was covered in mosquitoes every year. I didn't realize there was like a region of the world where mosquitoes did not take over. And then out came the banana slugs. And it was like a particularly bad year. And these things were like a foot long, running like just sliding across the backyard, and you could like see them. They're
Oh,
huge,
yeah.
huge slugs. And they were everywhere. I couldn't walk
I was
barefoot
just
because
gonna
I'd
say
step on
they make you
one.
think twice about being barefoot.
Worst sensation. I feel so guilty when I kill something and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're
Oh.
walking through your backyard and it's like stepping on a water balloon that's slimy. And you just feel so bad. So slugs are everywhere. So I'm combating slugs. I think I'm gonna spread diatomaceous earth. But so you live on the Eastern Washington, so you don't have slug problems.
No.
That's quite
Yeah.
hilarious. That's so funny. That's so funny.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. I've got mushrooms growing in my backyard or in my garden, which means it's healthy. It's healthy soil, good mycelial network in the soil, so that's good. I don't know anything about mushrooms though, in terms of how to harvest them or which ones are safe. So I don't ever venture that way. But I did have a run-in with an herb that popped up in my garden, and it looked just like, and of course this is 2 years ago, so I'm forgetting the name of it, but it looked like this herb that I know is safe. And so I ate a bite of it and I'm like, oh, it tastes just like licorice. And I thought, oh, this is so cool. It's growing in the back, it's a wild herb. It's just so neat. And then my hand started to shake and I'm like, uh-oh. So I looked it up and I actually took a picture of it, sent it to my local gardening group, and they said, oh, and again, I'm forgetting the name of it, but they're like, that's a poisonous weed that will kill you. And I thought, oh my gosh, so I called poison control and I didn't die, obviously. I'm still here. But it really snapped me back to reality that we can't just go around eating. Like there was a man in 2012 that died in Washington State from eating this weed. So we can't just go around like picking anything and eating it. We have to know. We have to just verify and know. But that snapped me back to reality. Like, oh, herbs can be, depending on which herb, it can be as dangerous as taking the wrong medicine, as taking the wrong drug, right?
Mhm.
So we just really want to make sure that we're doing the right thing and identifying, and that's something you teach in your book, right? To identify
Yeah.
the good ones and the bad ones, the
Yeah.
poisonous ones and the not poisonous
Yeah, I'm
ones.
so glad you brought that up, because yeah, that's kind of definitely step one is always be 100% sure of the plant you're harvesting. And yeah, in the book we have beautiful botanical illustrations, watercolor illustrations that we had done specifically for the book. For each plant, but also in the beginning chapters, we talk a lot about plant ID and understanding botanical terms. And we like to make it really fun for folks. And so it starts with like looking at botanical parts at your grocery store, just the plants in the produce section, and learning to recognize plants is really just learning to see patterns. And at first it can seem intimidating, but really our minds are really great at recognizing patterns. And so once you understand like different leaf patterns, they'll just jump out at the landscape at you. And the other thing is that I have always been taught this, and I always continue to teach it. The most important plants to identify growing near you are the hazardous ones. And so that's where you start when you learn how to do plant ID, is you learn about potentially toxic plants, and you learn them really well, and you learn how to ID them really well. It's not like there's hundreds of them, but there are some ones that are very, very important to know. Where I live, all around my house, I have death camas, which is aptly named. It's one of the most poisonous plants in North America, and can definitely cause instant, or I shouldn't say instant, but very painful death.
Wait, what's it called again? I gotta search this up.
Death camas.
What's it called?
Death camas.
Death? The word
Yeah,
death is in
yeah,
it?
yeah. It's very aptly
Death.
named.
Oh, look, I type in death and camas
There
pops
you
up.
go. Yeah. So it's a very
Wow.
common plant. It grows here in Eastern Washington. It grows all over, though not as common where you live. But it's not related to camas, but camas is a very important edible food here in Washington State. And before they flower, they can look pretty similar. So it's a really important one to know. There's all the poison hemlock, water hemlock. I wonder if that might have been
That was poison hemlock. That was
yeah.
it.
Yeah. So that one's very, very important to know. And that
to not
to
eat.
not eat. Yeah. And that plant family, the Umbelliferae family, is a really good plant family to know, to be able to differentiate them, because there are some important medicinal and edibles, like, the carrots are in that same family. Parsley's in that same family, but yeah, you want to be able to recognize those. And so we have a whole section in the book of just getting to know your local potentially toxic plants. And the thing is, it's like once you know those, it's not like it makes every other plant safe, but there is an empowering sense to be like, oh, I know the potential hazards in my area. Just, if you headed off into the woods, like you would want to know, like, are there rattlesnakes there? Or should I prepare for ticks? Or just, is this a flash flood area? Just all of those times. And you would want to know, what are the potential hazards around me? That's one of the things you want to know. And it really is, again, like for me, a really empowering thing to be able to look around the plants that grow around me, to be able to identify them, to know which ones are food and medicine, which ones are beautiful, which ones are potentially toxic. All of those things are so important. Another one it makes me think of is foxglove. Foxglove is really powerful medicine, but is mostly, people don't use it as medicine as much anymore because it is very difficult to administer and can easily cause death. And the heart drug digitalis is actually based on constituents found within foxglove. And so it's a beautiful plant, grows prolifically where you are. It's so much fun to enjoy it. We don't really use it as medicine anymore, but when it's young, it can look like mullein, which is a very safe medicinal plant. It can look like comfrey. So once you know the plant, it's not hard to tell them apart. It's just in the beginning, plants can look very similar before you really suss out their differences. And so yeah, you really want to know what you're harvesting. Dandelion doesn't have poisonous lookalikes, but it can have plants that really look like it. But once you know the secrets of dandelion, you'll be able to tell true dandelions apart from other ones as well. So definitely very, very important. And we've, went extensively in our book. We went through helping people to identify plants correctly. There's also great ways to learn plants local to you. Native plant societies in North America, Canada, and the United States. There's native plant societies where you can meet up with other people who are plant geeks, and you can find herbalists and other people doing plant walks and interpretive centers. There's local field guides. There's lots of ways to learn plants, and it's a really obviously I'm biased, but I find the whole process of getting to know plants just to be joyful, incredibly joyful. To be out there listening to the birds, feeling the sun on your face, getting to know all the creatures that go around you, but also incredibly empowering. When I go on a walk, I know all the plants that grow around me, and I do know, what I could eat right now today. I could go out and make a meal from the plants that go around me, and not only a meal, but those joyful remedies as well. Like the dandelion jelly or wild rose petal honey, or stinging nettle soup, as you mentioned, which is one of my favorite wild food dishes as well. So there's just so much joy out there, and that's what keeps bringing me back, is that joy. And we've been talking about how herbs are not a magic bullet for anything. And then, this I think is very popular within natural health, as we have all these things that we should be doing. We should sleep well, we should exercise, we should eat well. And obviously I agree with all of that. Those are the foundations of our health. But if we leave joy out of that, it becomes a list of to-dos and a list of shoulds. It becomes less and less fun. And for me, the being with the wild plants and using wild remedies is incredibly joyful. And it's not a should, it's a I get to. I get to go out into the forest today and spend time there to feel calm, feel more relaxed, enjoy all there is to offer, to harvest some nettles, to fill my basket, to appreciate all of the beauty and wonder out there. I get to bring them back to my kitchen. I get to make a nourishing meal. I get to enjoy this nourishing meal that is so tasty and delicious. That becomes a foundation of health. And from that springs so many, from the nutrients of the nettle, I have more energy that allows me to have more movement in my life, and that increased movement allows me to rest more peacefully at night and get a better night's sleep. And as we talked about all of the other side effects, of having from more energy to more luxurious hair to better skin. We didn't even talk about skin with nettle, but that's another important gift of nettle, is how it can help bring vibrant skin to the surface. And all of these things build upon each other in beautiful ways. And again, I love that it is inspired by joy and beauty, and less about shoulds or to-do lists.
Very cool. Yeah, we can have so much fun with this. Make a game out of it and go do, especially if you have children, or if you have a husband or a partner, we can go make a game out of it and do some kind of wild foraging game, like who can who can identify the most medicinal herbs or something like that. So we can make it fun. Yeah, I'd like you to think about the last 24 hours. How many herbs have you used in your personal life in the last 24 hours?
Wow, that would be a lot. It's especially with spring here, I'm kind of constantly grazing outdoors. I already mentioned that last night I made that soca bread, and I put wild violets on it, and dandelion flowers and leaves, and some other things from my gardens like chives and pansies. And I served that with a dandelion pesto. So I put that on top of it after it was eaten. And
Yum.
as a drink, I had violet syrup that I just made. And I made the violet. It's another plant we can go on and on about, but the violets are just so amazing right now. And they have this really incredible scent and flavor to them. And so I made a syrup out of those. And I made it by making a strong tea and adding a bit of honey to that, just as a little preservative. And then I use it up pretty quickly because I use little honey, so it doesn't have a long shelf life. But then I added that to sparkling water, like a tablespoon of that to sparkling water. And I definitely, last night having that meal, I was pretty thrilled with myself, actually, because it was so beautiful and such a priceless thing. You can't really buy violet syrup of that quality anyway. And it was all of my own making. I went out to the meadow and I harvested the violets and I made the tea, and the tea from purple violets is just so incredible. It's, this beautiful purple, intense color. And so I had all those experiences and was able to enjoy that. And another plant that I have been enjoying a lot lately is hawthorn. And hawthorn is a plant that I regularly use and often widely recommend as well. It's an amazing cardiovascular tonic, and there are so many benefits to hawthorn, like really, especially in regards to heart health. And you don't have to have heart disease to enjoy or benefit from hawthorn. It's just something I think of it as like, kind of like people will say, like, eat your carrots to have healthy eyes. It's just something you do. I think of hawthorn as like, heart disease is very prevalent. Might as well enjoy hawthorn regularly. Hawthorn is really high in antioxidants and flavonoids, modulates inflammation, which is often the underlying cause of what's going on with heart disease. So many studies out there showing vast benefits of hawthorn, both for prevention as well as for people who have moderate to severe symptoms of heart disease. And the berries are just delicious. And so they're really fun to add to your life. And I love to make a vinegar extract from the hawthorn berries. So in the fall, I harvest lots of the berries, fill them in a jar, fill up a jar with them, and then I fill that with vinegar. I often just use apple cider vinegar, cover that with a lid that doesn't have metal on it, and let that sit for a while. And sometimes I'll add honey to that. And the straight up vinegar I'll use as a base for salad dressing. So like every time I'm eating a salad, I'm getting the hawthorn in there. And then when I add honey to it, that makes what we call an oxymel. And that is a really delicious way. Again, I'll add it to sparkling water. And it's this, tangy, sweet, sour drink. It's this beautiful red color, so it's gorgeous, and it's a really fun. It's kind of like a wild food soda, mock soda, I guess. And so that's another wonderful way. So I've had lots of hawthorn in the past 24 hours as well, and about to go harvest the stinging nettle, as I mentioned, and I had a tea this morning that had oat straw, nettles, hawthorn, lemon balm, and lemon verbena in it. Yeah, that's what's coming to mind. So right now, in terms of wild foods, and then I'm a big fan of herbs and spices in cooking. So my husband made this breakfast today that was lots of vegetables, and he uses like this, an amazing amount of spices in there. And this is kind of a running joke that I'd ask him, like, oh, this tastes so good. What spices did you put in here? And he says, all of them.
Yes. I love it. I love it. You mentioned lip balm, salves. What other kind of like ways are herbs seeping into your life that are unexpected, like for skin care, hair care, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I definitely love the lip balms and salves. I love infused oils, actually. One of my favorite infused oils for this time of year is to infuse violet flowers and dandelion flowers into an oil. And both of those gently move lymph and just support lymphatic function. And so it's a beautiful oil to make. You can add a little bit of essential oil to it once it's done. And that makes a great oil for all over the body, but especially in places that are rich in lymphatic tissue. And so it's a wonderful breast massage oil just to keep breast tissues happy and healthy, and axilla or armpit areas as well. So that's a lovely way. I make all sorts of infused oils throughout the year. I'm kind of famous for them, especially amongst my friends who have already started making requests for the year. So
I love you said I'm kind of famous. Yeah. I'm kind of a big deal, I'm kind of famous with these oils. I'm like, yeah, heck yeah, you are.
Yeah, I used to give away like I've given away so many herbal medicines, and after a while I began to realize that like that's what my friends really wanted, were these infused oils. So infused oils, which then can be made into facial creams, which I also get a lot of requests for. Yeah, so I infuse wild roses into oil. That makes a beautiful one. I grow holy basil in my garden, which is an amazing herb. And that one, I just started making infused oils with that recently, and I've already had many requests for it again this year. So lots of infused oils. And I think there's so many applications for infused oils in terms of just, moisturizing your skin, obviously, but also you can use it for like pain relief. So I do arnica infused oil, cottonwood bud infused oil, which is, oh my gosh, that smells so good. The cottonwood bud oil is great for pain relief, but also is like doubles as a perfume because it has such this heady, lovely scent. And I use herbs for shampoo. So I like to infuse nutrient-rich herbs into tea and then mix that with castile soap. Makes a really great shampoo. So that's kind of an unexpected way. It can also be a body wash as well. Let's see what else. I love to do baths with plants. One of my favorite baths is to make a really strong chamomile tea. And by that, I mean like 2 cups of the flowers infused into, like a quart and a half of water for 20 minutes of hot water for 20 minutes. So you make this really strong tea. It's super bright yellow. You strain off the chamomile flower. So you're just left with the tea, and you add that to bath water. So profoundly relaxing. If I have, especially if I like my shoulders get tense or just my whole body is tense. Obviously, the hot water is relaxing. Just relaxing in the bathtub is relaxing, and then the addition of this really strong chamomile tea is also really lovely. Yeah.
There's this Korean spa in Seattle I love going to, and it's only for women, and they call it the naked spa because
I've been to the naked spa.
Okay, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about. And oh man, I love it. But before you get into the hot tubs, you can pour this tea on you. And it's so wonderful, so relaxing, and it's antimicrobial. I forget what herb that is. Do you know?
I use mugwort in that.
Mugwort,
Yeah.
that's right. So you can use mugwort as an antimicrobial to wash away, fungus and virus and all that stuff. In the light of COVID-19, have you changed any of your home remedies, or have you added anything in the last few months for your family?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I feel like I haven't been doing new things, but it's been an inspiration, we could call it, to really double down on the things that we normally do. So one thing actually is the hawthorn, as I mentioned. Something that's just kind of coming out in the news a lot right now is that people with hypertension and heart disease are having more serious complications with COVID-19. They're also seeing these issues with blood clotting coming out. I feel like things are changing so often. So I don't know, by the time this airs, it might be even more news or different news about it. But that's what's going on right now, is this lots of things about the blood clotting and involvement with cardiovascular disease. And so I don't have those things, but it made me think like, well, might as well just enjoy hawthorn even more. And I'm in no way trying to insinuate that like hawthorn's going to save anybody from COVID-19. The severity of the symptoms. However, I think what COVID-19 is showing us is that the healthier we are, the better chance we have at, either being asymptomatic or having reduced symptoms. And so it's a reminder to me how important hawthorn, as well as all of the, lifestyle choices that go along with healthy cardiovascular function can be. But hawthorn's definitely showing up a lot in our lives right now, because I think might as well support the heart as best as we can. Something I often feel, but again, especially inspired right now. So hawthorn being really important. We've been using a lot of teas that are wonderful for modulating immune system care. And what I mean by modulate is there's definitely herbs that we know like boost the immune system. Like you take it and then suddenly you have, increased NK killer cell activity, or, increased macrophage activity. And so we know that we can boost the immune system in that way. But herbs are pretty amazing in that we see time and time again through studies, because obviously this is not something we can inherently know, but that herbs have a balancing effect. And so they act differently in somebody depending on what's going on. And so when we talk about like seasonal allergies, which can be kind of intense immune response, we can actually see we can take these immunomodulating herbs, and instead of boosting the immune system further, they actually modulate the response and help calm this excitability that we're seeing. But anyway, so these herbs are wonderfully modulating for the immune system and can help just support the immune system. And many of these herbs are tonic in that we take them for a long period of time. So it's not something like you take it and then suddenly you're, can leap buildings in a single bound or anything, but it's something that you take daily over a long period of time to see the benefits. And so a big one for me is astragalus. It's a root that comes originally from China, but Western herbalists have adopted it widely because there's really nothing else like it. It is nourishing, it's sweet in flavor, it can be added to so many different things, and it's just a wonderful way to support your immune system day in and day out. And so we've been using lots of astragalus in decoctions, which is simmering the root. And with that, I often combine it with Codonopsis. And both of these are really wonderful herbs for the lungs. They support and strengthen lung function, which seems to be also an important thing to be doing right now. So those three are kind of at my big list. And I've also been, sometimes I taper off my vitamin D supplementation at this stage, but I haven't spent that much time in the sun this spring. And so I've kept up with vitamin D, which also seems to be very important. So yeah, then, all those things that I already have naturally dialed in because it's not my first day and I've had serious chronic disease and I've taken care of myself ever since. And I think these things we've mentioned them, they're just so profoundly important to the best of our ability, to get that restful sleep and to get movement in our lives every day and eat those nutrient dense foods. And as I've mentioned before, joy, I think that is such an important part of it too. And I know that can be a hard thing right now. So many of us are going through varying levels of sadness. Some of us are, safe sheltering at home. Some of us are essential workers on the front line. There's, so many things going on right now that the world's topsy-turvy and can be easy to be falling into anxiety and fear, which is only natural. But the more we can counteract that purposefully with joy, the better. And so in whatever way we do that is a good thing. I love The Office, the TV show. And so I've been watching like an episode or two of that a day because it's like, it makes me laugh and it just kind of takes my mind off things. And laughing is so important right now. So in addition to my walks, that's part of like my daily therapy is to laugh in whatever way. And and just kind of remind myself, and even the passing of the seasons, that is such a powerful thing for me too. It makes us see like how precious life is, to see the wildflowers come and go so quickly, and we can't, here the wildflowers are blooming and they will soon be gone. And so it's that reminder to be present and appreciating things day in and day out, and just the joy that surrounds us when we really get to do that. It takes away the monotony for me, like this, like I think of before when I lived in cities, actually Seattle, and it was so easy to ignore the seasons, with indoor air climate control and being able to get whatever vegetables I wanted whenever at the large grocery stores. It's easy to just kind of lose sense, it rains 9 months out of the year. So it can be monotonous in some ways, but when we tap into the seasons, there's so much richness there, seeing what birds are coming and going, being in tune with the seasons, recognizing those differences, how slight, seeing the plants come and go. It's all a beautiful thing.
I love it. I've had several expert guests on the show about how to get rid of parasites. And it's really interesting that we, I guess, in our modern age, believe that we're infallible to parasites because we're not, we're humans, not animals. We live in houses, not in woods. And so, of course, we don't have parasites. Meanwhile, 1 in 3 people have a parasitic infection and don't know it. And one of the experts I interviewed, Dr. Jay Davidson, said that our ancestors, even just like our grandparents or great-grandparents, like just look 100 years ago, we would regularly deworm ourselves every year with the same herbs that we would give our cattle. So farmers would take, the right doses, but take the similar deworming herbs that they would give the animals because they knew we needed to cleanse our body. And that was something that we did, I guess through trial and error for thousands of years, is take herbs and take certain foods that help to remove the parasites from our body. What wild herbs do you take to prevent parasitic infection?
Well, I can't say that I really take herbs with that intention. Um, but those bitter herbs that I mentioned before, or just bitter in that sense, is widely used for kind of getting rid of any unwanted creatures growing down there in our bowels. Yeah, that bitter flavor is something, that I mentioned, like when we have it, like a little bit of bitter, it can be kind of enlivening and kind of bring a spark. When you get intensely bitter things, it's just as bad to us as it is to parasites or whatever. So that is kind of like the idea is like by having these bitter foods, it's basically sending out a signal like this is not a good place to call home. You want to leave now. So that's there. Those plants are widely used for that. We call them vermifuge herbs or vermicidal herbs, but it's rare that we use herbs necessarily to kill because if they kill parasites, then it's kind of obvious it's going to be very difficult for our own bodies to handle it. So it can be on that toxic scale, but we can use them to
Mm.
be like basically show them the door. Like, all right, you don't want to be here anymore. So those bitter herbs are really important for that. One of the most famous for this is gentian root. And that's one that doesn't grow here. I really love to use the herbs that grow around me. But I did fall in love with gentian root. It comes from the Alps in France, where my husband's from, and I love to visit it there. It has been a bit over harvested, so now I only get cultivated sources of it. But it is, you could call it like a disastrously bitter herb. It's like not pleasant in any way, shape, or form. In terms of its bitter flavor, it's very intense, but widely effective, and it's often used. You could take it in a capsule as a way to kind of avoid taking that super bitter flavor. One thing I like to do is make my own herbal, I call them herbal pastilles after the French word, which is basically like an herbal pill. You basically take powdered herbs, and mix them into a little ball, and then add just a bit of honey to hold it together. And those bitter digestive pills, can be used for digestion, but again, those bitter flavors are not loved by parasites. So gentian often makes up a big part of that.
Very interesting. Yeah, one of the herbs that is relatively safe for us, but not safe for parasites, is Mimosa pudica seed, and that's from Ayurvedic medicine. And I was surprised to see a Mimosa pudica tree growing out past Monroe, Washington. Um, I think it was in Salton. Big, beautiful tree, and I thought it would only grew in India. Maybe there's different variations of it, but that's one of the things that Dr. Jay Davidson talks about. Um, because like you said, certain ones are really harsh, and can be harsh on our bodies as well as harsh on the parasites. But we want to do everything we can right now to bolster our immune system and support the terrain of our body so we can have the best outcomes possible when we come in contact with any kind of virus or any kind of pathogen. You had mentioned violets a few times. Before we wrap up today's interview, can you tell us about the medicinal properties of violets? Is this just the wild violet flower that you've been making these delicious teas out of?
Yeah, the violets I've been using are at a friend's house, and the story goes that she, got a clump of violets from her friend 20 years ago and planted them in her garden, and now she has like millions of violets. I mean, it just like covers the hillside of there where she lives. So, and it was several years ago that she just happened to mention she just mentioned it offhandedly to me, like, oh, I got all these violets, and they just are invasive and they spread everywhere. And I was like, what? Wait, tell me more. And so now I go every spring and I get to harvest so many of them. And yeah, violets are beautiful plant medicine. You can use the leaves and the roots. I mean, sorry, the leaves and the flowers. The roots can be slightly emetic or make you want to throw up. So those have been used therapeutically in the past, but we don't use them so much today. They're mainly the leaves and the flowers. And we kind of talked about similarly how plantain and mallow especially have that soothing demulcent quality. That is also true of violets. And so when there's dryness and irritation, violets are really wonderful for that. So kind of the same thing. It's kind of funny we talked about all these herbs that do that because there's not a lot of soothing, cooling herbs out there. We just happen to talk about them today. So violets are really great for that, great for the dry coughs. I mentioned that they do support lymphatic health. And I think of our lymphatic system like this big waterway that's running throughout our body. And just as rivers and streams can run smoothly or they can become stagnant or swollen, same with lymphatic vessels. And so violet helps keep things moving cleanly, clearly. They actually love to grow near, wild violets love to grow near running water. They'll grow on stream banks. And I like how that's kind of, it reminds me of how they can be used to keep our internal waterways running really well. So violets used to break down hardened cysts, especially chronic ones. I mentioned they can be used as a breast massage oil. It's used for fibrocystic breasts. So all of those, anytime, there's hot conditions, especially hot, dry situations, like maybe a rash, it's really great for moistening that, soothing that as well. Violet is lovely for the nervous system. It's very calming. And so anytime there's stress and panic, violets can be used to soothe and calm things. In Iran, they love violet medicine, and they use violets in really interesting ways that we don't do necessarily in Western herbalism. But I just know from researching it, and now I'm excited to try it out. And there they use violet for promoting sleep, for example, and they use it specifically for people with insomnia. So that's another way to use that. It is such beautiful. I think part of the reason that violets can bring joy and help us be more calm is the medicine we make from violets is so profoundly beautiful. I mentioned, you harvest these, especially the purple ones. You can use pretty much all violets in the same way, but the Viola odorata, which has a beautiful scent to it, and there's a couple other purple flowers that have the scent as well, but not all of them do. But if you can find the purple flowers that have the scent, it's such a unique violet scent, and you really cannot find it anywhere else except from the fresh flowers. It's very hard to capture that for long term. But anyway, you make a tea from that, and when the violet flowers are also used for litmus tests because they're very sensitive to the pH of the water. And so when I make violet tea, it actually turns blue. It turns this like deep, dark sapphire blue. And then if I add just a little bit of lemon juice to it, like I'm talking like a couple drops or so, then it turns into this like brilliant purple, like amethyst purple. They're definitely gem colored. And so that's really fun to make medicine with that. And, I make mocktails with that. My husband also, when I made the syrup, he just made ice cream with it with coconut milk. So it's like a coconut milk ice cream with violet syrup. And so it's beautiful. It turned out a pale color. You're diluting it with all that coconut milk, but it was just really beautiful. And the syrup, as I mentioned, you can drizzle that on whatever you want. I like to add just like a little bit to waters and drink it in that way. But it's beautiful, but it's also, wonderful medicine, as I mentioned, that great for moving the lymph and addressing stagnant lymph, as well as for dry coughs too. So, yeah. And then the leaves are great food and medicine as well. It makes both the flowers and the leaves make a wonderful tea. But you can take those young leaves and add them to your salads, and they're delicious. Bland taste, don't have a ton of flavor to them, but great addition to salads as well.
Very cool. So unlike drugs, where most drugs people take because they're already sick and then they get on a drug, some herbs you can take preventively, like you can take as like a supplement to feed the body more nourishment to support the body and being healthy. So you can figure out how to get these wild herbs into your life every day to increase your vitamins and minerals and fight all the phytonutrients, anti-cancer, antioxidants. And then there are certain herbs that you can take when you have an acute situation. And in fact, many drugs, pharmaceutical prescription drugs, are actually based on herbs. They figured out I mean, the most common one everyone knows about is aspirin. Aspirin is a pill. You can buy it in a store. You go to the pharmacy, you buy some aspirin. But aspirin is actually from willow bark. And what's really interesting is that if you take too much aspirin, you can go blind, you can go deaf. I actually had a friend who had aspirin. He had a really bad toothache, and it was like a Friday night. It was like so painful that he just started taking aspirin like crazy. And by Sunday, he was blind and deaf, and he was freaking out, obviously. He gave himself aspirin poisoning because he thought to himself, aspirin's healthy because it's natural, and therefore I can just keep taking it like candy to get rid of this pain. And he soon discovered you can't. You can, probably kill yourself if you take too much aspirin. But what's interesting is if someone were to take the willow bark and make a tea out of it or something and try to get the same medicinal properties, if you take too much of it, there's other compounds that would cause you to start throwing up, that would cause your body to reject it. So when we isolate something out of nature, it doesn't there's it's what's nature has these fail safes in place. So if you take too much of it, of some herbs, not all, but some herbs, your body will reject it, or your body will throw up and try to get rid of it because it's too much, like willow bark. But if we isolate it and make it into a drug, then it actually becomes something that could kill us, right? If we take too much of it. So it's interesting to see that in nature there's more of a balance, that there's we want to make sure we know how much to take and how much not to take, and what we should take and what we shouldn't take. We want, just like drugs, you want to have that same level of respect with herbs, but herbs have a lot more safety than many drugs do. So I think it's very interesting, this whole world to dive into and to learn from. And I know that my listeners will absolutely love learning from your latest book, Wild Remedies: How to Forage Healing Foods and Craft Your Own Herbal Medicine. Now you're giving away a copy of your book to the listeners they can go to the Learn to Health Facebook group, and you're going to be giving away a copy of your book, which is really exciting. Thank you so much for offering to give one of our listeners your book. And I know that all of our listeners should go out and grab your book because as what now the state parks in certain states are reopening, and we're going to have access again to nature for those who didn't. And so this will be such a fun thing to do for the whole family, to go out and wild forage and discover this whole pharmacy in our backyard, which is it's so beautiful what we can do, again, with caution and with safety and with education. We can step forward in a very respectful manner into nature and find our remedies. Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up today's interview, Rosalie?
I think I keep thinking about joy today, and it is a powerful thing in these times to choose joy with all the uncertainty going around. And I guess I would like to leave by encouraging people to get outside and just to observe and experience what's out there and be open to finding joy and happiness in the simplest of things. Watching a butterfly flutter away, listening to a songbird, feeling the sun, the wind on our bodies. If you can get outside even for a little bit and lay on the lawn and just, or anywhere, and lay down and just feel the joy of being outside, the fresh air that's there. I think that is some of the best medicine that we can find right now. And the further we want to sink down into that, identifying plants, getting to know them, using them as our food and medicine, the deeper and more profound that joy becomes. But it begins with that first step of just getting outside, and that's a step I'd encourage everyone to take.
Beautiful. Now, all the links to everything that Rosalie does is going to be in the show notes of today's podcast at learntrohealth.com. Rosalie De La Forte's website is herbswithrosalie.com. You are welcome back on the show anytime. I know you have even more to teach us. We had this whole uh section planned out on um people, plants, and energetics, and I thought that was really fascinating. And you teach people how they can understand their symptoms and their energy to pick out the right plants for them. I'd love to have you back on at some point to dive into that. I think the listeners would really enjoy that.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I'd really enjoy that as well. I really like this format that you have of this allowing so much time to really sink into these conversations. I've been enjoying it while listening to your podcast, and then to being a guest. It's nice to be able to really talk about these things in depth. And
Yes.
yeah,
Yes, let's go deep. It's so funny. When I first launched the show, I got a negative review. They're like, "Oh, this is too long." I'm like, "Then don't listen."
yeah,
Like,
it's not for
then
them.
go listen to something shorter. This is not for people who want short podcasts. I want to go deep. I want to get lots of information. I want to like really get value. I've had listeners say sometimes it takes them a week to finish an episode, but they're so happy, like, because they'll always play it when they're in the car. And then I had so many listeners say that they'll listen to an episode that really intrigues them. They'll listen 2 or 3 times and take notes.
Mhm.
And that's when I knew I needed to transcribe the episode. So we got a transcriptionist and we transcribe them. So listeners don't have to, I mean, you can take notes if you want to, but they can go to the learntoyourhealth.com website and they can read through the transcription to find, and we try to make them as accurate as possible. You know, there's always goof ups in transcribing, which are comical, but they can go through and see things, so they can reference what you said as well. So that's it's really exciting that my listeners love the deep, long conversations where we get to go into all this wonderful information and learn so much. It's like taking a college course from you. You know, we just we just dived in and learned so much from you today, and I can't wait to learn more from you. I can't wait to get your book, Wild Remedies, and I know my listeners would love to get your book as well. And of course, having you back on the show, can't wait to dive into understanding more about how to identify what plants we should use for ourselves. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, please come back on the
Yeah, I'm
show.
looking forward to it. Thanks, Ashley.
If you enjoyed today's episode and if Learn to Health podcast makes a difference in your life, please consider joining my membership for less than $10 a month. You can support me to continue doing this podcast, and you can also support your health because I've made a membership site where I teach you amazing, delicious healing recipes, including a recipe I talked about today, the nettle soup, the stinging nettle soup, which is so delicious. Oh, it's the most delicious nettle soup I've ever had. And that recipe, among many other delicious healing recipes, are in the Learn True Health Home Kitchen membership. So you'd benefit this podcast to continue to do the work that I do, and you'd benefit yourself and your family by joining the Learn True Health Home Kitchen. Go to learntruehealth.com/home kitchen and give it a try. You know, for under $10, you'd be getting access to all these great videos that I keep making for you every week with these amazingly delicious healing recipes. I keep saying the word delicious, but they really are delicious, and they're healing foods. So it's like this win-win situation. Help yourself, also help the podcast. I'd love to see you there. I'd love to support you in your health and healing success. And I can't wait to see you there. Go to learntoyourhealth.com/home kitchen and check it out. Thank you so much for being a listener of the Learn True Health podcast. I so appreciate you, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your day.